Welcome to the Clutch Kitten Gaming Podcast, where I play an indie game for 5 hours and let you know whether or not it's worth your time and money. Hello and welcome. This is James, also known as Clutch Kitten, and I am so stoked that you're here to join me for episode 19. It's odd because it feels like it's been forever since I've done an episode, even though we had a roundtable last week. But I'm back for a normal episode, and there is a ton to cover, so let's move it right along. Before we get into our story for this week, I want to remind you to jump on iTunes and give the show a 5-star review if you enjoy what you hear. Also, if you get value from the show, consider telling a friend about the podcast. So this week's story is about pirates. Not the pirates that roam the ocean, or the Sea of Thieves game that seems to have fallen off the face of the planet. I'm talking about the pirates of video games. Now, if you're anything like me, you've possibly downloaded a game ROM from a random website at some point, and you've wondered whether or not those game developers even notice. Well, according to torrentfreak.com, it appears that Nintendo most definitely does notice. According to an article by Ernesto on November 12th, a lawsuit by Nintendo against LoveRoms.com and LoveRetro.com has finally settled for just over $12 million. These sites were apparently run by Jacob Mathis and his wife, and it's interesting because if you go to LoveRoms.com, there's an apology to Nintendo. It basically says that they know that they've infringed on copyright and trademark laws, and that it's caused harm to Nintendo, its partners, and customers by offering infringed copies of those Nintendo games. In the Torrent Freak article, it mentions that it's possible Nintendo negotiated a high number on paper, so that $12 million, but that the defendants could end up paying much less. We won't know for sure, at least for a while, but it's clear that Nintendo is serious about protecting the rights of their games. I think the moral of the story here is that we should think twice, at least before starting a pirating site of any kind. Let's transition now to the heart of our episode, this week's game. Today's game is called Pit People. This is a turn-based strategy adventure game that was released on March 2nd of 2018. It was developed by the Behemoth, which was created in 2003 by John Bays, Tom Fulp, Brandon LaCava, and Nick Dryberg. They're located in San Diego, California, and have made a few other titles including Alien Hominide, Castle Crashers, and Battle Block Theater. Pit People currently costs $19.99 on Steam, and according to HowLongToBeat.com, the main story takes 9 hours, but it can take upward of 19 hours if you get into a lot of the extras. There is one person who recorded playing 70 hours, but that is absolutely insane. I honestly don't know how they put 70 hours into this game. You should expect a playtime of between 9 and 20 hours. It's currently out on Xbox One and Steam. I played on Steam and chose to play with the mouse and keyboard. Although I generally wouldn't look to play a turn-based strategy-style game with a gamepad, I could see this game playing decently with one. Let's take a look now at the narrative. Today was another normal day on the farm. You and your beautiful son Hansel were raking the fields of blueberries and preparing your afternoon snack when out of nowhere, a giant dead space bear crashed into the planet. From there, things only seemed to get worse. A horde of child eaters showed up at the front gate, the ground around you started turning into hexes, and bear blood started shooting up out of the ground. Being the noble farmer that you are, you took up your pitchfork and readied yourself to battle the intruders, while wondering what other kind of crazy-ass chaos the dead bear was going to cause. If you're confused already, do not worry, we're about to get into it. Pit People is set in an alternate universe with spirits, talking animals, vampires, pixies, and so much more. When does it take place? I honestly have no idea. There are Spanish conquistadors, spaceships, castles, record players, and so many other different items and people that point towards different eras that I'm content to not know. From what I played, the primary character of the story actually seemed to be a mysterious and sometimes cruel, sometimes benevolent narrator. You also start out by playing as Horatio, the blueberry farmer. But just like many other turn-based strategy games, you end up recruiting a party instead of just focusing on one protagonist. When it comes to the crux of the story, I have no damn idea. I haven't beaten the game, so if I had, maybe I would have a clue, but the narrative is so abstract and crazy that I was lost after the opening sequence. There are some side missions as you go through the game that provide some structure to the world, but I really wasn't all that invested in the broad strokes of the narrative. In my opinion, the best aspects of the storytelling were the small conversations before battles and the random comments made by the narrator. Although the story wasn't all that important to the game, I would venture to say that the writing was crucial to achieving the feel that the behemoth wanted to convey. If I haven't said it already, this is a wacky game. The writing was sarcastic and funky, and made me wonder what the developers were smoking before they worked on the script. Don't get me wrong though, a large portion of the writing was very witty and many of the jokes were funny. In some ways, the writing felt like a conglomeration of many popular shows like South Park, Bob's Burgers, and Futurama. Just to give you a taste of the wackiness of the game, beyond the fact that part of the plot is about a dead space bear crashing into Earth, I think some of the character names might give you a feel for this world. Let me read off a few. Angel Cakewalker, Gluten, General Custard, Jerkamedes, King Papastrella, Mr. Whispers, Sprinkles, Pipistrella, and Mrs. Sarsaparilla. It's really hard to conclude on how good or bad this writing is, because I think it comes down to your tolerance for nutty puns and zany stories. What I can say is that the story itself isn't going to be what wins the game over for you, but the tone of the game might be just your style. Let's move on now to gameplay. So what do you do in Pit People? Although there are small aspects of world exploration and collection, the core of the gameplay comes down to the battles. Whether you're battling in the arena, a random enemy in the overworld, or playing against your friend in the chair next to you, the gameplay lives or dies on how well you enjoy the battling. The best comparison I have for Pit People's battles is actually XCOM 2. Imagine that your crew of misfits is placed in the battle arena. Across the way from you are the enemies, and between you and them are obstacles, barriers, and other structures. To get out of the battles, either you kill all the enemies, or you white out. The battlefields are hexagonal grids, and each character can move a certain amount of hexagons per turn, and will automatically attack if they're in the range of an enemy. This is where things start to split off from XCOM 2. Unlike XCOM, or many other turn-based strategy games, your team members don't have abilities that you're choosing between on each turn. Some characters will perform different attacks depending on what range they are from an enemy, but all you're doing as the strategist is positioning your characters, ending your turn, watching your opponent's turn, and repeating. For me, this was an immediate turnoff as a lover of turn-based strategy games. I love choice, and although choosing where to position my character does give me some agency, it felt more like I was taking part in a battle of attrition rather than a game of chess. One portion of the movement that was interesting and key for your success actually had to do with attacks on enemies. Say you were to move your Cyclops one hex away from the enemy cupcake that was by itself, when you ended your turn, the Cyclops would be guaranteed to attack the cupcake. If, however, you moved your Cyclops to a position that was next to both the enemy cupcake and the enemy Electrobot, the RNG gods would determine which enemy your Cyclops hit. As such, the strategy when moving was to find a hex that helped guarantee a strike on your optimal target. One last thing I'll say about the combat is that an aspect I really appreciated was the mechanic for recruiting new team members. In some games, you'll find random NPCs that want to join your party, but you're actually recruiting from the enemies you face. The way you do that is that you're allowed to capture an enemy so long as it's the last one on the battlefield. The brilliant design aspect of this was that if you wanted the enemy mushroom or the enemy Cyclops, you had to leave it alive to wreak havoc on your entire team while you took care of the other enemies. What this meant was that the more powerful of an enemy you wanted to recruit, the more dangerous it could be for you. So we talked a bit about the micro of battles, But a lot of the fun actually comes before the fights. It comes in preparing your squad and collecting new items and weapons. There's a bunch of different classes in this game, ranging from poison farting mushrooms to the explosive pixies to rainbow unicorns and just your basic humans. Each class has different strengths or weapons that they work best with, and in town you can customize with anything you've collected. You can put a dorky hat on your Demiclops, or have your troll use a tree as a weapon. You can even choose whether or not your cupcake should have frosting and a waffle cone in its back. Many of these items are just cosmetic, but some also have a higher damage or different weight or status effects that you need to consider. The cupcake is actually one of my favorite classes in the game. Early on, you recruit a cupcake named Gluten and realize that cupcakes are the most selfless of fighters. They are strictly a healing class that gives of its own health to heal its teammates. During battle, it throws its own frosting to teammates so that they get a boost even when he's giving away the best parts of himself. Let's rein the conversation in and take a look at the big picture. The gameplay loop looks like this. Equip your team, pick a quest, ride to the destination in the overworld, complete the battle associated with the quest, and go back to town. As mentioned earlier, I think your enjoyment of the gameplay really relies on how much you like battles. To me, other than the collection and customization aspects, the quests and riding to destinations just felt like filler. Sometimes the overworld felt more like an annoying maze to get to the best parts of the game, but that's neither here nor there. How did I like the battles? Each time I got into a skirmish, I was craving for more control and options. In XCOM, not only can I customize each squad member, but they each have individual skill trees and up to 10 or 11 options on each move besides just movement. Even when I compare this to Into the Breach, Pit Fighters falls short when it comes to interesting strategic gameplay. Don't get me wrong, many of the battles were fun and the unique classes made fighting interesting, but all too often they just felt like a grind fest that I really wish ended sooner. Something I haven't touched on much is the co-op and online functionality. Even when you go to the town gate in a single player game, you see the option for 2 players. I played this game single player and didn't experience the co-op myself, but I can imagine that the gameplay and battling your friends is incredibly fun. Due to how simple the strategy of battles is, and how little micromanaging you have to do, I think that the gameplay is much more suited to online play or couch co-op than it is for hardcore strategy fans. Let's take a look now at the art and sound design of the game. Oftentimes, my thoughts on the art and sound design are pretty straightforward, but just like with the narrative, Pit People takes these design elements on in a radical fashion. The art is first of all simple and fun. It has a very cartoony look, and alongside that, the world is incredibly colorful. Everything from the characters, to the items, to the land you're moving your caravan across, they're all drenched with color. There is so much to look at despite the simplicity of the drawing. One of the other standout elements of the art is the animation. You'll very quickly notice that the developers love to animate practically everything. When you walk into town, each building is bouncing around like it's dancing in a Charlie Brown Christmas movie. The color, style, and animation in the game goes hand in hand with the wackiness of the story, and just like with the narrative, I think that your enjoyment of the art comes down to your tastes. My guess is that it will either rub you the wrong way very quickly, or you'll love it. The art gives the game a feel of high energy, fun, and like your choices aren't really a big deal. You're just there to have a great time. Likewise, the VO, the voiceover, is just as funky. The characters that speak actual English have dumb, exaggerated voices. The rest of the fodder of characters don't speak English at all. Their voices just spout gibberish. The characters I immediately thought of when I heard the voice acting in the gibberish were Terrence and Philip from South Park. The voices are so dumb that you can't help but laughing. The soundtrack was also similar. Some of the songs were actually super great to listen to and got you as a player hyped and energized. When I first started playing Pit People, I was ecstatic. The visuals and sound design aren't usually what I'm pulled toward, but it got me hyped, and the combination of all of it was comical. The issue I found though was that the more I got into the game, the more I got worn out at the intense energy and exaggeration of everything. The volume on my computer slowly got lower and lower as the game went on, and I just put my head down to keep playing. The last thing I want to mention is the UI and UX, the user interface and the user experience. Due to the busyness of the screen from color and crazy animations, many of the menus were actually hard to focus on and understand. Although I loved the amount of items you could collect in the game, the inventory system felt clunky. On the positive side, the interface during battles and wandering the overworld was actually pretty unobtrusive, which felt like a stark contrast to the craziness in the town. So we've made it through the narrative, gameplay, and art, so now it's time to summarize the positives and negatives of Pit People. On the positive side, the narrative, gameplay, and art all strike a similar, funky tone. If you're into that style, the feel of this game is going to be perfect for you. I also think the gameplay is streamlined in a way that seems great for cooperative play. I can see this as being a great game to play on the couch with a friend. On the negative side, if you aren't into the style and tone of the game, you're going to become annoyed very quickly. This game is steeped in quirkiness and dumb jokes. Also, I found the battles to be grindy and unfun after a while. As someone who loves the intricacies of games like XCOM 2, the relative simplicity of fighting in this game did not lend to my enjoyment. It's now time for the final boss. This is the part of the podcast where I let you know whether you should slay the game and buy it, flee the game and avoid it, or farm up and wait for a sale. I'll say first of all that I came into this game really wanting to enjoy it. It looked funny, and I heard it was similar to XCOM, so I was all about it. Unfortunately, I was really disappointed with what I found, and it was a struggle for me to even put in the time for this podcast. That being said, I want to place Pit People in two categories. If you're one of those people who watches the trailer and is immediately filled with laughter, and you're looking for a great game to play with a friend while you have an adult beverage, I would recommend you slay this game. If, however, you're looking for a single-player adventure strategy experience, I would say that you should flee Pit People. There's a possibility I didn't experience some more advanced mechanics since I didn't finish the game, but I honestly don't see myself going back after I put in the time I did. The humor lost its flair for me, and the gameplay did not hold up. As always, thank you all so much for listening in. Despite not loving the game, recording the podcast and talking with you is always fun. Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Clutch Kitten Gaming and on Twitter at KKG Podcast. Also, feel free to send me questions and comments to clutchkittengaming@gmail.com. I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend, and I'll see you in game.